Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about engineering managers and product managers. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how can a product manager and an engineering manager avoid stepping on each other's toes? Well, I would say that they have to align their priorities. And this can be a tricky one because usually, at least in my opinion, this fundamentally comes down to the value system of each party. Because usually there is, if the relationship works and you both understand what the value of the thing that you are doing is supposed to be, then I'd never see product manager and engineering managers sort of having issues with each other. It's usually when you have different perspectives on what you're supposed to be doing that, in my opinion, causes friction between between the two parties. So to give you a concrete example, the product manager, the perspective of the product manager, or like what they should be representing in essence, is the health of the product. In other words, the overall system, how it functions well, that it's delivering the right value, that there are customers and consumers and that they are being heard, and that this system actually provides some type of net benefit for the company or for the consumer of the whole thing, right? The engineering manager, depending on how you want to define that, their focus should be to supply the necessary tech talent and work practices and work frameworks to make that happen. So you can think of the product manager as being the stakeholder towards the engineering manager, who is the supplier of tech talent and code and all this good stuff. So in order for them to sort of align well, both of their focuses should be on basically having a customer obsession, if that makes sense, or a value obsession. In other words, if they're both aligned on that the most important thing is that they ship on time, that the thing that they have built is actually the thing that the customer needs or wants or so forth, and that they focus on overall, that the overall quality of the product is the main thing. If they both focus on that thing, the business value, if that makes sense, then usually they get along fine, in my opinion. Very often, assuming now, of course, they're both competent and all of this good stuff, right? The only time I see there's a friction is when there is a misalignment on the focus. So an example would be, you can have a product manager who feels that everything is too slow all the time, or feels like there's a problem with the engineers, that the engineers aren't really pulling their weight or things like that. But you can also have an engineering manager and tech lead or someone else who doesn't really focus on the product value. They're just focusing on tech stuff. In other words, refactors, migrations, all this sort of stuff, right? And so now the focus on the business value it's not aligned between the two parties. This is when friction usually starts, because you're not pulling in the same direction. This is very key. In any team or any partnership, you have to have some shared vision of what you're trying to achieve. And sure, there can be differences of opinion about how to achieve that, but fundamentally it's about goals. Do you have these goals? Do you share those goals? Do both parties understand why these goals matter? And there has to be a little bit of soul searching here. Do you actually have an understanding of what is required? Do you know how to get to these goals? Because in many cases, these frictions, they stem from either one party, as I said, not really having their eye on the money. Because the problem, an example, a classic, I've heard this 100 times, this is very common among architects and not just tech people, designers as well, where they will say, yes, of course we care about the customer and the business value, but in order for us to do this, we have to do this very expensive thing over here that takes 1,000,000 years, that technically we don't really have a lot of proof will make a business impact or a business value whatsoever. And we're doing it not because necessarily it's going to help, but because we believe without any proof or without any, like, it's just basically the engineering manager or the tech lead or the design manager, like whoever, right, who basically goes out and says, this is what I want. That is the essence of what they're saying. I want this. I believe this. And this is very frustrating for, say, the product manager. But then on the other hand, you can also have a product manager who is extremely flaky, like just ad hocs, different features, doesn't have like a process for how do we know what we should be focusing on, how do we know if we should do this. Like there causes a situation where the engineers can never really settle on like a path forward, because like there's like new feature requirements every other day coming in, and like everything is always a sharp deadline, everything, like they have no planning skills, no forethought or any vision whatsoever, which causes a different sort of issue. And so if both sides have one or two of these issues, this is usually where the friction comes. But I've always seen these things being resolved very quickly when both sides have the right level of competency within what they're doing, and they both align on a way of working together. That's actually the easiest way. In other words, the product manager is expected, for an example would be, a lot of teams like go back and forth, should we do agile, should we do scrum, should we do this or should we do that? But the reality is that I've always seen the same thing. Usually the ad hoc method, where like you basically just do whatever you feel like, is less efficient than if you have some shared idea of how to do things. So in other words, if a product manager wants feature A, B, or C, they are expected to explain to the team why this is needed, give them the necessary like context of this. They create a story, they prepare it, they schedule it, etc., etc. Like you create this workflow, and then the engineering manager, their primary focus is to make sure that the software that is being developed by the developers that these people are following a basic work framework that produces some type of reliable end output, and never indulge. Each side has to be aware of their own like sort of vices and limitations, because if they are not aware of it, these things like when you don't follow a work framework of some sort and you indulge those weaker sides that because the incentive for a product manager is to say yes to everything and to just like you try to push things as quickly as possible. The engineering manager's incentive is to just keep the developers happy, or to not deliver on quality, or so forth and so forth. So like you have to have some soul searching here and understand what weaknesses do you have, and how can you put in place structures that sort of mitigate that these vices from causing an issue in the relationship. And when people do that, I always see engineering manager and product manager pretty much getting along as well as possible, because there are many factors that might delay a project or so forth and so forth. But if you have truly competent engineers, usually the end results are fairly are predictable, as long as I said, they have their focus is on business value, because it's usually when they don't have a focus on business value where all these issues come up, and when the product manager is more concerned about their own career and future than to do what is right by the team and the overall product. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually the way to avoid stepping on each other's toe, if you're a PO or an engineering manager or whatever you are, is to sort of align with the other parties about how do we do this together. What work framework should we use? How will we execute? What does each side need in order to fulfill whatever goals that you have? So you align on the business value as the main thing. If the product manager is a person of character and understands that their primary focus should be to understand the customer, understand the product, and like what we should be including, what we should schedule, what needs to be done now, what needs to be done later, and they have the understanding that things needs to be prepared and planned for the engineer so they know what they're supposed to be doing, then they're doing everything right, in my opinion. If the engineering manager understands that it's not about code, it's about business value. In other words, you should not indulge random software developers just doing whatever the hell they want and so forth. You should set up a basic framework for delivering on the goals that you have. Those goals should be business value related, and then your technical solutions should be made based on on those business goals, not on some arbitrary cool technology or something like that. Focus on the business goals, and then make sure that, as I said, you can allow for like experimentation and things like that, but you can't allow your own technical desires to take over and not actually meet basic quality needs, basic delivery speed, etc., etc. That should be your focus. So one is the stakeholder in this relationship usually, and one is the engine, or like the supplier of technical skill. If both have that and a clear understanding, and check out, like sort of watch themselves for like these indulgences that might happen, and focus on the business value, usually I don't see them stepping on each other's toes. They're usually, they have on average a pretty good relationship. So yeah, have a great day.